Okay, welcome to the latest episode of Holyrood 2021, the show where we'll be talking to candidates in this upcoming Scottish Parliament election. I'm really excited to be joined by the co-leader of the Scottish Green Party, Lorna Slater. Hi, Lorna, how are you?
Good morning. I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Not a problem. So we're not. So today's episode, we're not going to talk about independence that much because we've met before, we've spoken before on the show, and we did an entire episode in November, more or less talking about independence. So while it is an important issue, and I'm sure it will be talked about lots during the campaign, we're going to try and avoid independence for this episode, if that's okay.
Of course.
So I just want to start. I'm asking everyone this as sort of a starter question, all the candidates. Why do you want to be an MSP?
Oh, that that is an interesting question. I think it almost comes around the other way around. I'm very keen that we get more women in politics. It's something that I feel is really important, that we have a greater diversity of experience in politics, more scientists, more people who've worked day jobs, more engineers, more people from different backgrounds. And I can't hold that belief and say to everyone else, right, you need to go and stand, because standing for election and being a candidate and all that stuff is a really difficult thing to do, particularly for women, particularly even more difficult if you're a woman of color or a disabled woman or a trans woman. And I can't push other people to do this very difficult, very vulnerable thing if I'm not willing to do it myself. So it's more just that I guess my principles say that I need to stand. Whether or not I will be elected is up to the voters of Scotland. But I feel that we should make it more normal in our culture for people to stand for election. It shouldn't be this big, weird, scary thing. It should be something that everybody feels they can do.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. So you're standing in the seat of Edinburgh and North Leith. If I'm not mistaken, you're going to be the first ever Green candidate to stand in that constituency. Am I right, for the Scottish Parliament?
I can't remember. I don't know if it's first ever. We have certainly, since I joined the party, we didn't stand in the constituency, or maybe we didn't run a campaign there. Sometimes we run. We used to call paper candidates, but I genuinely can't remember. We focus on specific areas where we are more likely to get in, but the big problem with standing in constituencies for small parties is that of the deposit. So a big party that's well known, it will get more than 5% of the vote. They get to the end of the election and they keep all their money. So not only do they have more votes, they have all the money. For us, if we risk losing that's £500 per constituency seat. If we stand in places where we might lose that, we come to the end of the election and we've lost a ton of money. So we started out behind and we end up worse off than if we hadn't stood. So that's a massive barrier to us standing. We would love to stand everywhere, but small party, our political system is really geared to favor big parties, rich parties. And so we are unable to stand everywhere in constituencies. So we have to be very careful and stand in those places where we can be pretty confident we'll get our deposit back.
Yeah. So you're also standing on the Lothian regional list as number 2. So what was it about, I guess, Edinburgh, North Leith and Lothian? Why did you want to stand in that constituency and in that region?
Well, so that is not my decision to make. All decisions about who's going to be the candidate, where we're standing, all of that's made at branch level. So we're a grassroots political party. I wouldn't dare, Patrick and I wouldn't dare to tell the party members what to do. That is not how this works. Everything is decided by party. So every branch and in regions where there's more than one branch, they come together and they figure out what the local regional strategy is going to be. So in Lothian region, it's dominated by Edinburgh branch, as you'd probably expect. And the members of Edinburgh branch got together and put together a strategy based on where we're strongest, our greenest areas. And Edinburgh Northern and Leith and Edinburgh Central are our greenest areas. We do very well in those areas. So the branch has chosen to stand the 2 candidates in those. So Alison Johnson is standing in Edinburgh Central as the constituency there, and I am standing in Edinburgh Northern and Leith.
Okay. So one of the the big political issue of the last year has been obviously the COVID pandemic. It's not just been a political issue; it's been an economic issue, a health issue. It's such a massive thing. So we seem to finally. I'm trying to be cautious here, but we do seem to finally be reaching an end point, hopefully. I don't want to. I've been trying to, set my expectations low, so I'm not disappointed throughout this whole process. So,
all of us, yes, it's a good strategy.
So, obviously now we're looking at obviously coming out of the pandemic, and obviously a big part of that will be obviously economic recovery. I'm wondering, what are your ideas what are the green ideas for how Scotland can recover its economy post-COVID?
That is absolutely the question of the day, and it is going to be the core focus of our manifesto. So you're absolutely right. COVID crisis has caused an economic crisis. And we need to look ahead to the next crisis that's coming our way, which is climate change. Because if you think living through a global pandemic is tough, you haven't yet lived through the breakdown of your planet's biosphere. Yeah. COVID, in some ways, is a really good sort of almost like an experiment in how governments deal with a major crisis of this kind. And I think we can show exactly how the UK government in particular, handled it badly, trying to put things out to the market that should be actually part of the public domain, being unaccountable rather than being responsible. Their procurement process for PPE didn't have any sort of transparency and scrutiny, giving contracts to your pals, and look at the result of that. There is still not an operational test and trace system. So what we want to do, what the Greens want to do going forward to come out of this crisis and to deal with the climate crisis going ahead, is change how we invest the money. So coming out of this, every political party is going to promise to invest. That's a given. There's no question that everybody wants to invest. The question is, where will this money go? After the 2008 banking crisis, there was lots of money reinvested in the economy. There was quantitative easing, the creation of new money. But where did that money go? That money went to Wall Street, it went to the corporations, it went to the billionaires, it went to the banks, it went to where there was already money. And we didn't see that money trickle down. That didn't improve people's wages. It didn't reduce house prices and rents. It didn't actually make anybody's life any better. It just made the rich even richer. And that's what has to change. So don't let anyone tell you there isn't enough money around. It's about where the money goes. So we want serious investment, and the kind of investment that's going to benefit people. We have a fully costed, properly researched with industry experts plan, which we call Rail for All, about upgrading Scotland's railways. So this is exactly the kind of things you can expect from the Scottish Greens, practical, costed things that tackle the climate crisis, because rail travel is a low emissions, known technology. It's easy to cost, it's easy to measure the benefit. It will create enormous amounts of jobs because, a nationwide rail building and upgrading program, and it allows that investment in the future of Scotland. So investment is different than spend, and we know from our having done the proper research that every pound invested in our railway scheme would return 1.6 pounds to the Scottish economy. That is the kind of thing you can expect from the Scottish Greens, and that is what will take us into the future. It's a really positive and exciting future.
Yeah. So another big issue from the COVID pandemic has obviously been schooling, and obviously lots of children have missed. I mean, I've had it in my own experience as a PhD student. Trying to write a PhD from home is not.
I can't imagine.
But obviously, kids in primary school, obviously, it's going to be incredibly difficult. They're going to have missed, obviously, reading classes, writing classes. Kids in secondary school will have missed, important stuff. So I'm just wondering, what has to be done? What should be done for education to help so many, probably millions of children across the UK, not just in Scotland, to catch up with their education, to make sure?
So education is devolved in Scotland, and our approach to putting children back into school has been different. So much more phased, so that we can see the results, so we could get children back earlier than down in England. And the Greens have pushed all along for getting school staff, including teachers, vaccinated. That's something that we have now won. That will be happening. And our view is always, absolutely, kids need to be in school, but not at any cost. How many teachers' lives, how many school staff lives are you willing to? Is it 500 teachers? 500 dead cleaners? Like, what are you willing to risk? So not at any cost. And I think we can all be confident now that the vaccines will get to the school staff that need them. And there's talk of vaccinating, which is something we've pushed for, senior students as well, because 16 and 17-year-olds transmit the virus just like adults do. Yeah. So I think we've got the right approach there in Scotland. I'm very worried by some of this chat around catching up and chat around making kids go back to school in the summer. There is more to being a kid than studying and sitting at a desk or staring at a screen. And the other things that kids have missed out on is socializing, climbing, running, seeing their relatives and friends. And those things are a really important part of childhood development too. So I would not want to see extended school hours or reduced holidays, because honestly, we all need to remember what we're living for. We've lived through a really, really difficult time, but there is more to life than exams. There's more to life than work. Let's get back to the really important things, keeping our relationships going, keeping our mental and physical health.
Okay. So another, I guess, more of a sort of philosophical point about this whole pandemic. I think, from my perspective, I think it's definitely hammered home just how much power governments have, just how much power politicians have. And obviously the fact that the Scottish government and UK Parliament have been able to keep people in an entire country in its homes, effectively, it's quite a powerful image. So do you think that almost has increased the expectation of voters now that they've seen just how much power politicians have, and it's really hit home for everyone personally? Do you think politicians almost now have more of a responsibility to actually use this power positively and actually show voters what they can do radically, I guess?
Well, I hope so, because I think you're exactly right. It's sort of a myth that the right wing has allowed to develop that governments are powerless. Oh, we can't possibly do anything about that. When actually corporations and billionaires spend billions lobbying governments. Yeah. They donate to, right-wing parties. They donate to campaigns. They go to these, to £20,000 a dinner seat at dinner parties, that sort of thing. They absolutely know that that's where power lies in governments. They wouldn't spend so many millions lobbying it if that wasn't the case. So I think, but part of that is rebuilding the trust that people have in governments. And that's been undermined. It's that classic tactic of, defund something, defund the NHS, and then tell everyone it's rubbish and has to be abolished. But I think people can see through that. And I hope people, and I think young people are beginning to feel their responsibility and accountability, that sort of helplessness that perhaps people of my generation feel, oh, all politicians are the same, nothing can be done. Yeah. I don't think young people feel that. I think young people are angry. I think they want change. I think they want politicians who sound like them, who speak like them, who represent the diversity that they are. The idea of the rich middle-aged white men running the country is not as popular. Yes, it does feel like change is coming. It does. The left wing and youth and diversity have taken some pretty severe blows in the last few years in terms of successive Tory governments, Brexit, Donald Trump, some of the other populist stuff we've gone on in the world. It's felt like we've been on the back foot for years. It would be really nice to feel the change there, for people to come out of COVID and go, no, do you know what? I want my government to be responsible. I want my government to invest in things that matter to ordinary people. And it matters to me that my kid can cycle safely to school. It matters to me that I can get an appointment with an NHS doctor, not Virgin Health or something like that. And to expect governments to do things like implement living wages. Everybody who works should be paid enough to live on. Governments allowing companies to pay poverty wages and then going, oh, we couldn't possibly. Yes, you can. You absolutely could do something about that. So you're quite right. Expecting governments to use the powers that they have and not act all helpless is something we should definitely be coming out of this with.
Okay. So I really want to talk about climate change, because I think we talked about it in the last interview, but it's such an important issue. I want to talk about it again. So I think definitely, I think it's how important is it that you make sure that the Green Party makes sure it is an issue talked about in this election? Because I feel like at this election, obviously, understandably, we're talking about independence, talking about COVID, talking about education, all the different issues. And so I think, again, climate change is at risk again of being sort of put to the side, and sort of, it's the later issue, as it were. So I guess, how important is it that the Greens keep pushing the climate change?
It's vital important. It's existentially important, but it will be the #1 issue in our manifesto. But we don't think that those things are disconnected. And this is something that frustrates me a bit when people put environmentalism in a box and go, oh, the environmentalism's over there. No, the environmentalism has to be everywhere. It has to be in our planning permission. So currently our planning frameworks don't allow, so even if politicians wanted to, they can't reject a development on the basis on environmental ground, because that's not part of the process. When we do things like look at investing in rail, for example, upgrading rail lines, the only case that's ever given for that is a very narrow economic case. It doesn't talk about people's well-being. It doesn't talk about young people being able to get to study. It doesn't have a sort of joined up approach there, and it doesn't consider environmental impact. So we currently don't consider environmentalism and sustainability throughout every decision we make, but that's what the Greens would like to see different, that every single decision we make in government. And we're not talking about individuals' decisions. You know, bamboo toothbrushes and recycling are all very well. Please do those things. But it is not up to individuals to save the world. Governments have the power here. And it's about how our energy is generated, how our steel is smelted, how our goods are transported around the place. It's about whether we're investing in road expansion. Hint, it doesn't work. You can't, every time you expand a road, you increase traffic, you don't decrease traffic. Whereas when you increase rail capacity, you reduce traffic as well as reducing emissions and make the world more accessible to everyone. So there are really effective things that we can do that will tackle the climate emergency. Number one, make lives better, everybody's lives better, and work toward our economic recovery. I mean, I've mentioned rail a couple of times. Other programs along those lines are home insulation and upgrades. So that's another one of these really sort of triple win ones. It invests for the future of the country, meaning that in the future, fewer people will die of cold, that everybody's home is cheaper to heat. It means that right away it creates loads of jobs because we'll be upgrading homes. We need people to do that and manage that work. And it's an environmental one because it reduces emissions if people are burning less gas, or if people have zero emission heat pumps and so forth installed. It means that we reduce our carbon footprint. So there are some really straightforward investment proposals. And that's even before that. I would even say that that's after the low-hanging fruit. The number one thing we have to do is stop subsidizing oil and gas. So we talk about, you know, oil and gas business, or, you know, the big beasts of BP and Shell and so on. Those are not exactly profit-making enterprises. They take billions in government subsidies, as do airline industries and so on. The first thing we should do is stop giving them our money. If they want to compete in the business sense, then they need to actually compete. We should be subsidizing environmentally sustainable industries, not these dinosaur industries that have to be phased out. It's actually, I think, a bit dishonest of the Scottish government to say, oh, oil and gas indefinitely, probably into the 2050s, because that's dishonest. That isn't true. Those industries need to be wrapped down. And by pretending they'll go on forever, they're doing the people who work in those industries and the communities who depend on them a disservice, because they're leaving those people to the tender mercies of massive global corporations who don't care about the people, who don't care about the communities. If the government was to say, do you know what, we care about you. We want to make sure we're building new industries that you can work in and your kids can work in and your grandkids can work in, that make sure you will have a thriving community, you know, for generations. Only governments can step in and do that. And that is, it's all tied in together. Tackling the climate crisis, making sure we have sustainable industries and good jobs for people, and improving people's quality of life all go together. You can't do one of those things without the other.
So obviously, I think I think the big arguments for why the Scottish government does invest in these industries is obviously jobs. They'll say, oh, it creates jobs, it gives people jobs. So obviously, then you need to create alternative jobs. I guess you'd say sort of green jobs to replace those. Does the Scottish Parliament have the powers at the moment to invest and create those jobs, or would it need more powers, possibly even obviously independence, you would probably argue?
No, so I've already described two very major industries that the Scottish government does, the rail and the housing. I mean, I work in renewable energy. I'm work in tidal energy. I'm an electromechanical engineer. Co-leader is something I do as a volunteer. So I'm on my boss's time, but I'll make up the time. So as an example, my company is building a tidal turbine in the port of Dundee, made with steel that was bought from Liberty Steel in Motherwell. And we're using skilled workers from all over Scotland to build this. The turbine is 73 meters long. So it's something like 800 tons, I think. So it's the size of a ship. And we're keeping a shipyard busy with one turbine. With multiple turbines, imagine we were building 50 of them. We could keep BIFAB busy. We could keep Ferguson Marine busy. We can keep the Port of Dundee busy. We can start transferring assets that are currently used for oil and gas to building tidal turbines, to building wind turbines. It was a real shame that even though wind turbine technology was developed in Scotland, it was allowed to be taken over by global corporations who outsourced the supply chain and a lot of the skilled work, so that Scotland's economy didn't really benefit from those things. And a lot of people, if you talk to Shetlanders, for example, think very poorly of wind turbines because they have wind turbines built on their land. They have to do with the construction and the road building and all that, but they don't see any benefit from it. And that's the difference. So we absolutely need to make sure that when we're harnessing the next sort of tranche of renewable resources, that we aren't just handing it over to global corporations and letting them do what they want, that we are putting stipulations on that significant amounts, not tiny amounts, huge amounts have to come back to local communities, that they have so much that they commit to Scottish supply chains, that benefit of our resources stays here in our country. So I think that, you know, all of this goes together, and it paints what I think is a really positive future for Scotland, and it's absolutely stuff the Scottish government can have. Now, we can do more as an independent country with our own currency and our full economic control. We can do more, but the Scottish government can do a lot more than they're currently doing.
Okay, so obviously in November 2021, you've got the UN climate conference in Glasgow, assuming it's not delayed again. How exciting is that? How much of an opportunity is that for people in Scotland to really engage with, like, how big of a deal is it? I mean, well,
it's a big deal. It's a huge deal because we are now less than 10 years away from the sort of, a couple of years ago, there was this sort of 10-year deadline given by the IPCC report. If we don't change our society fundamentally in 10 years, we are going to pass the tipping point. And that tipping point would take us well past 1.5 degrees of warming into 2 degrees, 4 degrees, and probably, honestly, on that trajectory, we'd hit 6 or 8 degrees in a century. Let's remember that at 6 degrees of warming, 95% of life on Earth is extinct. That includes humans. Yeah. The reason we say 1.5 degrees of warming, which all countries have signed up to, who signed the Paris Agreement, is not because 1.5 is safe. It's not safe. I mean, we can already see devastating fires, devastating floods, the Arctic's on fire, mass extinction events of wildlife and so on. So this is already happening, and we haven't even hit 1.5 yet. It's only going to get worse. But actually, in the 2 years, or I think it's 4 years now since the Paris Agreement, nobody's done anything. Nothing's happened. Emissions worldwide have continued to go up. No significant changes have been made. Governments are still widening roads. They're still expanding airports. We're still getting increasing amounts of energy from coal and oil and gas. I mean, look at a Labour council opening a coal mine during a climate emergency, and the Westminster government going, yeah, that's fine. We don't have a problem with that. So this COP is really a sort of make or break situation. And I confess to being, I want to be optimistic. I really want to be optimistic. I really want countries to have frightened themselves and go, oh, crap. We actually have to do stuff now. We said nice words, but we haven't done anything. I mean, the Scottish government calls themselves a climate leader, but they have missed every target they've ever set. We're delighted they have good targets, but if you don't meet them, they're meaningless. So yes, I'm optimistic. I hope that this means that the world will now take the step from having said nice words to taking strong action. But we'll see, just the track record so far is so poor, but we'll be there, and we'll be pushing for effective action.
Yeah. So obviously the final topic I really want to talk about is LGBT plus rights, particularly trans rights. But I want to start by just talking generally about LGBT plus rights. What more can be done at the level of the Scottish Parliament, I guess, to enhance the rights of LGBT plus people, to improve equality in Scotland?
So we've just run a campaign in the last week at the Glasgow Green Party on trans healthcare, and we think that that's sort of the next stage that we need to get to is some issues like GRA reform. Obviously, we're in favour of that. That's been in our manifesto and in our active politicking for a long while. But we need to move that on. Trans people having to wait 3 years for effective healthcare and having these sort of isolated clinics to deliver that is ineffective. It's actually dangerous. It's a really frightening. Imagining having to spend 3 years to see someone. Yeah. So that's where we're going to be campaigning is more practical things. In other countries, for example, gender sort of healthcare is actually dealt with through GPs because GPs are trained in it. They understand how to use the right language. They understand the right kind of referrals. They themselves know the options for different types of counseling, different types of treatments. And so you don't have to wait for this special clinic. You can go on to your GP and go, gosh, I'd really like to talk to somebody about this. And they can go, well, here's your options and here's how you do it. And so it's, again, a more integrated approach. I don't really like this sort of sticking people in boxes like, oh, well, you're in the trans box. You must go over there. Like, no, trans people are just people trying to get on with their lives like everyone else. And, let's stop picking on the trans, integrate trans healthcare with everybody's healthcare, and so that it works properly for everybody. So that's where we'd like to see the conversation going.
So I do want to talk more about the issue of trans rights. It is it's interesting because obviously in the United States, it's very much a left-right issue. On the left, people are very pro-trans rights, rightfully, in my opinion. But it seems in the UK, and also I've noticed this in Scotland, especially with the nationalist parties, the SNP and the Greens, there is this sort of this quite bitter divide, and there are people who are very sort of weirdly, I don't know why, they're sort of more cautious of trans rights. They're not willing to support trans rights. Why is that? Why is there such a weird sort of division in the left in the UK and in Scotland?
I'm not sure I can answer your question specifically, because it's, my party's position is very clear on this, and my personal position is very clear on this, that trans women are women,
Yeah.
trans men are men, that there are no conflicts between groups of human rights. When if you compare it to sort of the segregation in America and the Jim Crow laws, when Black people gained civil rights, white people didn't lose them. That's not how that works. And so much of what we're hearing against trans people is exactly the same sort of thing, horrible things that were said about gay people during this whole section, the awful Section 28 thing, that I think a lot of sort of hetero cis people have forgotten how awful that stuff was, because it didn't affect us. And if you look back now and look at the awful things that were being said about gay people during the Section 28 stuff, it used to be hideous. To be gay in the UK, and we've come past that to a place where it's really normal and acceptable, and I want to keep that place, and I'm looking forward to getting to that place on trans rights. I have no doubt that we will get there. There's been some positive movement, particularly in the last month or so, with parties making positive declarations and so forth for trans rights. Let's hope we can move past this, because all the trans people I know are sick to death of talking about this. Let's move past it. Let's deal with the climate crisis. Let's deal with integrated healthcare, and get past this awful sort of rehash of the Section 28 horribleness.
I agree 100%. It's an issue which, honestly, I mean, the reason I ask it is it does confuse me, because to me it's such an obvious thing, right? It should just be exactly the same as gay rights, exactly the same as rights for racial equality. It should be simple. It should be an easy thing. Anyway, Lorna Slater, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you coming on again, pairing with me for another interview. I do appreciate it.
Not at all. It's lovely to speak with you.
Cheers.
Have a good day.
Hi guys, thank you for watching this latest episode of PhD-Politico Discussions. If you enjoyed this video, then please don't forget to give it a like. And if you want to watch more content like this, then please do subscribe. Bye guys.